Hey everyone, welcome back to Exploration Arcanum. My name is Jason. My guest today is Pleasant Gehman, a writer, dancer, actor, musician, witch, tarot reader, and Hollywood icon. From the age of 16, Gehman worked as a journalist and cultural commentator with articles published on rock and roll, teenage homelessness, prostitution, magic, and more. In the late 1970s and early 80s, Gehman documented the Los Angeles punk scene she helped create in her fanzine Lobotomy. She has appeared in many documentaries, including the Hulu documentary series The Darkside of the 90s, and will be featured in the upcoming documentary series Magick Show by Richard Metzger. I want to thank Pleasant and you for joining me today. I'll put links to Pleasant's social media and projects in the description below. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. You're kind of like the queen of the strip for a lot of people. But what I wanted to talk to you about is how you got started, not only in music and journalism and writing, but also as in the occult. How did that all get started?
Well, the occult came a long time before music and journalism. For real. I've talked about this before to people, so the listeners are hearing this, it might be old news, but maybe not. My very first psychic experience happened when I was 3 or 4. I lived way out in the country in this old Revolutionary War era house in upstate New York. And there was nothing around us but forest and a rural route, right? And so I was in the playroom. It was sort of dark already, but it was that was when it got dark early. It was standard time, not daylight savings time. And so I was just like playing la 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 la, and this man's voice came into my head and said, "Tell your mother the barn's on fire." And I went hysterical. I was a tiny little kid. I was like looking around. I didn't know what it was. It wasn't coming from the TV, So I ran into the kitchen screaming, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy, a man told me to tell you the barn's on fire." And she looked at me and she said, "What? What man?" And I said, "I don't know." And I was like so like out of control, hysterical little kid that she went outside and looked, and the barn was down this long slope, and there was flames starting to come out of it. And so my older brother and my dad and the volunteer fire department, because we were miles away from the closest town, just all came, and got it put out. It hadn't been going on for that long. But that was my first occult experience.
Wow.
And
So it was interacting with spirits. So maybe a former soldier who had died on the grounds or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if it was a soldier or someone that used to live there. It could have been like an ancestor of mine. I have no idea. I mean, I remember vividly the voice coming into my head, but I didn't really analyze anything. I mean, obviously at that age I didn't, but even going on later, because I'm such an old lady, there was a lot of my life that there was no internet. I had no idea that was called clairaudience for decades, But it happened another time when I was like about 12 or 13. I think I was marching down this pathway after school with a bunch of kids I knew, because we always used to go into the woods to smoke weed. Then a voice came into my head again. I don't know if it was the same voice, but it because because there had been such a time lapse. But it just said, "Go home now," and I just was like, "Okay." And I said, "You guys, I can't stay. I have homework." Which was an utter lie, because I always had it, but I never did it. But nobody seemed to like wonder about it,
Yeah.
And then they all got busted, which meant we were like way juvenile. Like it just meant that they got like study hall, which was actually detention.
Right. Yeah. But you were guided away from that, so you didn't get in trouble.
Yeah, but that voice, I always, always, always listened to it. And another time that happened, and this was getting into the 80s. I mean, there was like times in between it, but this one was wild. I had to pay the phone bill for my punk house, Disgraceland, and we were always like, with the rent and with the phone bill, it was always either late or a partial payment or you know,
Right.
total 80s punk house shenanigans. Anyway, they were going to turn my phone off, so I went to a payphone on Hollywood Boulevard to try to call the phone company, and the lady was yelling and screaming at me. She was like, "You're always late, blah blah blah." And, like, "I'm sorry, we can't do any extension, and you have to pay the whole thing right now, or we're shutting the phone off at like 4 o'clock or whatever," she said. And so I hung up the phone, and I just thought to myself, like, "Fuck." Wait, we're allowed to swear on here, right?
Go for it.
Well, that was what I thought. I could say it louder, but everyone understands the sentiment. So as soon as I said that, I hung up the phone, and I just like looked down, like I sort of hung my head, like, why am I such an idiot all the time? And there was something sparkling under my feet, and at first I thought it was a gum wrapper, and I looked at it more closely, and it had a dollar sign on it. So I picked it up. And it was a money clip. And so I'm just sitting there thinking, well, what if someone comes back for this? So then I'm on the phone going, blah, 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 like with the door of the phone was shut. So people would think I was talking to someone, but I was really waiting to see if someone would pick it up. And I was sort of counting the seconds or minutes in my head, because I thought maybe half an hour would be a decent amount of time. I stood there for a long time. Like, now I would have looked unhoused, but anyway, so then finally I thought enough time had gone by. So I went to the Vogue Theater, which was like, a movie theater across the street. And I went into the ladies' room, and I took out the money clip. It was silver. It had a dollar sign on it. There was $200 in there.
Wow.
And so I immediately went back to the phone booth, and with my last dime called a taxi, which was something I never did because I could never afford it, and went down to the phone company and paid in cash, and then still had a whole bunch of money left over. So I took another taxi up to Hollywood Boulevard and bought these hot spike heel over the knee boots and some Jack Daniels. I went back to my punk house and was like, look what I got. So
that's awesome.
Day drinking.
So it was called Disgraceland?
Yes.
Okay. It's funny because there's a popular online place called Decentraland. And
there's also another podcast called Disgraceland, but I mean, we were calling it this in the 80s, probably before that guy was born. And the reason it was called Disgraceland was because my boyfriend gave me a plaster bust of Elvis from Tijuana that I immediately painted. I immediately painted Alice Cooper makeup on it.
Awesome.
So that was on the mantelpiece at Disgraceland.
Nice. So when did you first really start focusing on your occult practice? Because, intuition, guardian angels, things like that is one thing, but you actually made a life around this. Like, I was reading your memoir called Rock and Roll Witch, which I think everyone should get a copy of. This is a great book. But when did you decide that you wanted to make this the centerpiece of your life going forward?
Well, I can give you a couple of answers to that, because I started doing tarot. I got tarot cards. I saved up money from like babysitting and whatnot, and I got tarot cards, but it was a Marseille deck, which for those of you who are listening, if you don't know what it is, it's this is my first deck. I don't know if you can see how messed up it is. I still have it. It's just like worn out. Like,
wow.
But it didn't have, it wasn't like the Pamela Coleman Smith decks where you could just look at any of the suits and sort of tell what was going on from the pictures. Like, if it was 6 of Wands, there would just be a bunch of wands there, or there'd just be a bunch of cups, and I had no idea what was going on. So I'd make up sort of stories about the major arcana, but people would always tell me like, oh, wow, that's exactly what I'm going through. And I thought I was making them up, but like now in hindsight, I realize it's because I'm psychic. I never knew I was psychic until like years later, also because of no internet, because I thought if you were like a real psychic,
right,
then you would 24/7 just be able to walk anywhere and read everyone's minds, you know?
right,
And I thought,
right.
and I felt like my like abilities, which they weren't even called that in those days, or maybe they were, but not to me when I was a kid, you know?
Right.
I just thought it felt like when you're on an old school TV set and you're like turning the dials, and one channel is all fuzz and the other one you can only hear like every third or fourth word. So I just thought I can't be a real psychic. But I was doing all of that stuff. Hold on, of course, everybody's texting me because we're on a podcast. That happens all the time.
It's okay.
But so I was always very interested in it and doing it all the time, you know, for friends. And then I would do tarot readings over the years for people, but it wasn't like my main thing because also I was in a band. Well, I was in a lot of bands, but my first band, the Screaming Sirens, we were on tour all over the place, you know, so rock and roll kind of like took tarot out of the picture a lot because there was so much other stuff to deal with. I was always the contact for booking. I was one that actually booked our tours. I'd have to send hard copy like photos and press releases out, and then we would just drive all over America. So then I started up again, like a lot, not just for personal stuff, probably in the late 90s, but even my band, the Ringling Sisters, if you can see on the first album cover, it's like a full on like setup of like witchy stuff that I did. I made that picture.
Right.
And yeah, so the occult has just been a theme going through my life. And then also I'm a dancer. I don't know if you knew that. I've toured all over the world teaching and performing burlesque and belly dance. And so
And
when that came to a stop, the pandemic.
You have a show in Los Angeles, don't you? You have a show in LA that you do, right?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But when the pandemic started, like no one that was a dancer or a performer could perform. So people knew I did tarot, and I was just working nonstop. Like in my DMs on Instagram, there would just be request after request, or to my email for readings. And you know, I was doing it before then too, because I was working at the Green Man store when we would be in person. But like the pandemic just really hit it to a new level because I didn't know how I was going to survive like anyone else who's a live performer. And then that happened. So that was, thank you everybody who got pandemic readings from me.
Your character, you go by Princess Farhana, is that correct?
Yes. You want me to tell you why?
Yes, please.
Okay, so when I was belly dancing, and you know, when I started going to Egypt to learn belly dancing, and you know what? Actually, that was one of the most punk rock things I've ever done in my life. I wanted to belly dance all my life, you know, and I think this might come from past life things because it certainly wasn't in my family. Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to. And so when I started dancing at the age of 30, I just was doing it for fun. But people started asking me to perform. And let me just tell anyone that's listening, if you know anything about dance, nobody fucking starts a dance career at the age of 30. So, but I did. I went to Egypt. I didn't know it was going to be the start of a career. I just quit my job. This was really the most punk rock thing I've ever done. I quit my job and just told everyone, and this was like still in landline days, I'm going to Egypt. I'll be back in like, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks or something. And so I did. It was insane. It was absolutely amazing. It was unbelievable. Cairo was fantastic. I saw, you know, every belly dancer I could. I wound up getting hooked up with like the main choreographer of belly dancing. like she was famous. She'd be like how George Balanchine or someone else like that, some famous choreographer in the United States was. And then when I came back, I had a couple of costumes that I got in Egypt, which the economy is nothing like it is here. So they were like, I don't know, maybe $20 or something. I don't remember exactly. But I started working, and then I just never stopped. After I'd been working for a little while, whenever I had to go out of town for something, I would, like a wedding or something, I would call up on a landline, any dance studio there, saying, do you want me to teach belly dancing? I'm coming in from LA, and people would say yes. And so then other people just started calling me, or when email became more of a thing, emailing me, and I started touring all over the world. And I did that for 15 years, nonstop, until the pandemic hit. And now, of course, I'm back to doing it again, but not at that rate, because every time I took a trip, in those days, I felt my IQ dropping by massive points because I was just constantly jet lagged.
Gotta do it.
Anyway, yeah. So my show here started in 2018. It was 2017. It's called Bell, Book and Candle, after the Kim Novak movie, where she was a witch in Greenwich Village, but we spelled Bell with an E, so it's like Belle for beautiful girl in French. This whole show came from a dream. I had a dream about it, and I thought, I have to do this. And so I called up the girl who has been my co-producer the whole time, Shana Leilani, aka Intuitive Shana, on Instagram. And then I said, I've got this idea for a show, and we were trying to think of where to do it. And so finally I had more clairaudience, and I called my friend Lena to, because I'd been on tour so long, I didn't know about any the venues in LA anymore, like what was good, what had a raised stage, what had good lighting, all that. Mm-hmm. So I kept coming back to one place, and I called her up, and she said, well, where are you thinking of doing this? And I said, I've looked everywhere, but I need a quiet place for psychics, and I need a raised stage and good tech. And she said, well, what's your ideal place? And I said, well, El Cid, but everyone tells me it's like just sort of been falling apart. And there was a really long silence, and I thought she was going to tell me, like everyone else, that's not a good idea. Instead, she said, El Cid? And I said, yes. And she said, did somebody tell you I started booking it last night? And I screamed, what? So loudly. She dropped the phone. So she gave me a date that was 2 weeks out, and nobody puts together a whole entire dance show within 2 weeks, right?
Right.
And but I knew I could do it because of all the other show stuff I'd been doing. And then I called her back after like a week, and I said, listen, if this works out, can we do it on the third Wednesday of every month for the summer? And she said, well, I don't know. I'd have to ask the owner. And I said, okay. And so she calls me back, and she said, well, I asked the owner. He had no idea who you were, but luckily I was on speakerphone. And when I said your name, his dad knew you from the 80s and just said, oh, give it to Pleasant. It'll be great.
Nice. Nice.
So this is how the whole show came together. It was just total synchronicity. And now we're in our 7th year.
Nice. Well,
so if anyone wants to come and check it out, thank you. If anyone wants to come and check it out, it's Bell, Book and Candle at El Cid, always on the third witchy Wednesday of the month.
Right. And we'll put a link to that in the description so everyone can check it out. But speaking of El Cid, because one of the first books I picked up when I graduated from high school and could finally go out on my own was called The Underground Guide to Los Angeles. And
oh, no way.
Apparently you wrote that.
Yeah.
So this is like coming full circle for me, because I'm thinking like, where have I, oh my God. And it's in this the last edition was the third edition. I'm not sure if it's still in print or not, But I
No, because
remember.
it would have taken so much revising to keep it up to date.
Okay, because I remember that's when I first learned. I mean, I think everyone's heard of the Viper Room and everyone's heard of Sunset, but this are the whiskey. But this book actually taught me all these different hideaway locations that you may not see in like your tourist guides. So why did you write that book? Like, what was the inspiration?
Because whenever I was traveling, always the best way to get around town anywhere, whether it was in Europe or Egypt or just the United States, would be to have someone local take you around. Like they knew all the coolest bars. They knew like the places, like a hotel that was like cheaper than anywhere else, but like good and clean. Like they knew the most fun places. They knew workarounds to get to a park. They knew someone who knew someone that could get you in somewhere. And so I wasn't about to start a concierge service in LA, but I thought, like, if I write a book, this will give people some, like, what would now be called the insider info,
Right.
and I wanted people to know, like, sort of what was going on at various places, or, and there had to be a few additions because everything in LA, as I'm sure with other cities, like, changes rapidly.
Yeah. And I remember going to the whiskey for the first time, and I thought about the book because I was like, okay, well, the book says this is cool, so let me check it out. Only thing I know about the whiskey is this is where the door started. So let me go in here. And it really blew my mind, and it really opened the doorway to me going to all the clubs on Sunset. Because
Yeah.
and one that I wanted to talk to you about was the Viper Room, because not only is it an iconic location, it also had some pretty interesting dealings, and you were not so much a part of, but witnessed. Like it was where River Phoenix passed away, and it was a subject of an episode of the Darkside of the '90s documentary, which, like I said before we got started, was my favorite episode because you were in it. But
Thank
what
you.
do you remember about those days?
About those days in general, or about that
Or
night?
about the days on back in the late '80s, early '90s on Sunset?
Well, by that time, it had changed a lot since the 70s because I'd been hanging around and working at the whiskey all the time in the 70s. When hair metal started coming in, like in the late 80s and early 90s, it was kind of terrifying because everyone was trying to be like Faster Pussycat. But we loved Faster Pussycat. My band, the Screaming Sirens, was on the same label as them and stuff, and they were fun. And there was some other fun ones, but then all of a sudden there was this influx from like the Midwest and the East Coast and the Rust Belt and stuff, and those people did not how to. They were trying to look like the way hair metal-y, young glam hair metal people
Right.
were looking here, but like you would get like some sort of like, I know this is going to sound terribly like body shaming or just weird, but I am judgmental. If you're like a schlubby guy from like Pittsburgh, don't just haphazardly apply your girlfriend's lipstick and wear tight jeans. Please don't do that, because you're not going to look like anybody in Motley Crue or Faster Pussycat or any of the like sort of wild metal bands here. Like it was just horrifying.
Wow.
But there was like, it was crazy. It was like all of a sudden we were the Ellis Island of like hair metal glam bands.
Yeah. Yeah. The LA, the
It
LA.
changed the set a lot, the scene a lot. Like all those guys were like, their main offstage goal was to go out with porn stars just for the status of it, not because they wanted a girlfriend or because they I don't know. It was just wild.
Wow.
I'm very judgmental, as you can see.
That's okay. That's all right.
But, also from an anthropological view, to me, it was endlessly fascinating.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was very visual.
Yeah, yeah. And then also, the Viper Room kind of changed things a lot because they sort of had a celebrity cachet that was kind of snobby going on there too. And on that actual night, when River Phoenix like OD'd, I was the only working press person there. I was supposed to be covering that show. It was P. It was Johnny Depp's band, and with people from the Butthole Surfers and guests like River, right? Anyway, so I was supposed to be covering that. A few months earlier than that, like my band, the Ringling Sisters, we always put on holiday fundraisers at the Roxy and sometimes at the Palace, a bigger venue on Vine, which is now called Bordeaux. But one time at the when it was at the Roxy, there was this absolutely beautiful boy passed out on the floor in between the dressing rooms at the Roxy backstage. And so those were big, huge casts we had because we had all sorts of people that were doing like just mini sets for charity, like people that were very famous. And so I was trying to find the stage manager, and I said, there's some really nice looking cute boy, but he looks like he's passed out on drugs on the floor. Can someone check if he's okay? Or can they get him into a dressing room? Or, and then somebody told me that's River Phoenix. And I was like, whoa, because I had already seen movies with him in it, but I didn't associate it because he did look like a beautiful child when he was like laying on the floor. So by the time the Viper Room rolled around later, I knew everybody that was playing that night pretty much, except Johnny Depp. I got in, but they made me pay at the door because they said, like, you're not on the guest list, even though I was writing for Spin magazine. So I paid $7 and got in. And then I knocked on the dressing room door, and normally anyone who was playing would like answer the door, and see that it was me, and I would know them. And this would have been the situation that night, but nobody answered the door, and I'm pretty sure it was because there was drugs involved.
Yeah.
So this was back when you could smoke in the days of clubs. The whole club had like just layers of cigarette smoke in it. And I was already having allergies because there was forest fires burning all over LA, like from every part. And also it was, so I was just like crying, and I tried to ask the bouncer if I could go out the door on Sunset, and he's like, no ins and outs. And I thought, well, I got to watch more of the show. So I was sitting there with like tissues, wiping my eyes. And then finally I couldn't stand it anymore. And I'd seen like about 3/4 of the show, and I had enough to write something because I was never like a hard, like, reviewer of things. I was more, I wasn't a normal journalist. I more put myself into it, and I usually only wrote about people whose bands I liked, and that made me different than others. Anyway, so I said to the security guard, I'm going outside. He goes, no ins and outs. And I said, I know. He opened the door for me. I started to step outside. I literally tripped over River Phoenix getting resuscitated on the sidewalk. And every time I say that, just like now, I just got goosebumps. It was so horrifying. His sisters were there. I mean, I just looked at it, and Sunset was jammed because it was Halloween. The sky had this like crazy orange tint to it, even at night, because of the fires, and it just felt surreal. And traffic moved a little bit, and then a cab let someone out in front of the Viper Room, and I just took the cab and got the fuck out of there. The next morning, I woke up, and I thought I'd go outside and to just sit, and get centered and grounded for a minute. I opened the door, and it looks like those things that you see in the news, like every news media outlet you could imagine was in my yard. I still have no idea how that happened, like who told who what, because I know it didn't happen to other people that were there. I don't know who saw me coming over, if it was the security guard. I don't know if somebody combed the guest list at the Viper Room and saw, or that I was working press, that I was supposed to be. I have no idea. But and then my landline kept ringing with people going, Pleasant, do you need representation? Or Pleasant, this is the Donahue show calling, or this is, and I was just screaming at them. I don't know how celebrities deal with that. I locked myself inside my house, and I was just like, I was already a wreck from watching that happen.
Right.
And this was just like, it just felt like, like fucking sharks feeding, which is, an analogy a lot of people give about that side of Hollywood. It was really messed up. It took me almost 20 years to even talk about that to any kind of press, and I still don't. I've still just done it, I think, like 3 or 4 times. And by the first time I did it, it was for a BBC documentary, and I watched some of their stuff, and it wasn't sensational. So I thought, this is history now, so I should do this because I witnessed it.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you sharing that. It's an important moment, and the fact that you were a part of it is really just goes to what I was saying earlier about you being a part of LA. Switching a little bit back to the occult topic, are there any places in Los Angeles that you're particularly drawn to, particularly that inspire you magically or in that way?
Well, I love all the old cemeteries here. Like, I love Hollywood Forever. I love Angeles Rosedale Cemetery. Those 2 are my favorite. I live closer to Hollywood Forever. But at Angeles Rosedale, I would go there, and there was a whole section there where people. Sorry, I keep hearing something weird.
Does it sound like
anyway? I'm what?
Does it sound like distortion? It might be our mics.
No, it sounds like it's coming from outside. It's a monster. No.
Okay.
Anyway, so at Angeles Rosedale, I discovered this there was all these beautiful, like, antique vintage graves from, like, the early part of the last century. But there's also a place where a lot of, it looks like Santeria practitioners leave their work, because if for your listeners, if anyone's doing any kind of occult, you have to, in order to be safe, don't put it away on your own property. You have to either, like, bury it somewhere else, or leave it in water, or do something with it. Do not leave it, like, around your house unless it's a protection spell.
Right.
But yeah, so when I discovered that little area, it kind of blew my mind.
And does that influence your personal practice? The rich history of occultism in Los Angeles, does that ever play a factor for you?
It does. It always does. I'm always fascinated to find out. Like, there's constantly, like, different people I'm finding out about, like old silent movie stars, or people that, did art direction in some movie, or, photographers, or, crew people that were doing occulty things very early, like even before the days of silent film, I mean, like, just, and so many people that are associated with occult, like, have lived here or still do, I mean, like, there's just way too many to name. I loved Hollywood Babylon, the first one that came out, and then I found out that, like, Kenneth Anger was doing occulty things. I mean, there's been so many weird things that happened like that, like like LA's always been very, very occult centric and also cult centric, I might add. I'm sure that almost every city is, but LA's been more open about it, kind of.
Yeah. And it's funny because you mentioned Kenneth Anger, and you're both in Richard Metzger's documentary series Magick Show. And so tell me how that came together. How did you get involved with that?
Well, Richard contacted me about being in it, and I knew exactly who he was, and I was like, I got all excited, so I had to like settle down for a few minutes and ground myself before I answered his email back. I was just like, I was like, fully like a cult fangirl. Hi, Richard. I saw your episode with him too. But then we talked on the phone for a really long time, and he was great, and we're friends now. I actually just had a weird experience that involved him. So, how I was talking, I can't remember if we talked about this on the air or right before we started, so I'll just repeat it. I was telling Jason that I have something that's called the EPK, which is Electro-Psycho-Kinesis. So it's kind of like Carrie White throwing the John Travolta character across the gym, except I do it with electronics. I fry electronics. I make light bulbs explode. I once killed a police car when my boyfriend was getting arrested. I made the battery die. Actually, EPK or electro-psychokinesis is widely regarded with parapsychologists as a legitimate thing. However, there have not been very many studies done on it because it's really difficult to recreate the person's emotions, and because the person that's having it, it's their emotions are what causes the electrical disturbances. So it usually happens when you're either insanely angry, very stressed out, really tired, or absolutely excited and happy about something. And then like something, a light bulb will blow out, or in my case, like everything. Like I've even made the buttons on people's cars start going toot, 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 like the electronic buttons. Me and my sister has it too. We were standing in the parking lot of a farmer's market for like 20 minutes, both going like this, trying to open her car's locks, and it worked. It was working, and every time it worked, we started screaming. So here we are, two old ladies just fucking doing
nice
cartoon motions, but the car would unlock every time.
So next time they make a movie about the craft, we're going to have to include you.
Yeah, at least let me be a technical advisor so their cameras don't fry.
There you go. But actually, that's a good segue, because do you have any authors, movies, books that you particularly like, that you enjoy in this genre?
Oh God, in occult stuff?
Right.
In occult, I have way too many. Like I can't even like right now think of any off the top of my head, but I'll read anything, whether it's like about the Salem witch trials or whether it's like a fiction story. Usually I like to read about real life witches or people. Also, this is going to sound horrible, and it sounds horrible to me every time I think of it, because I don't have the time to read the way I used to. I used to just have hours to like just read books and do stuff like that, but I'm doing so many things between readings and Bell Book and Candle and like my wildlife projects like the Ramones ducks. I don't know if you even know about that. Do you know about the Ramones ducks?
No, I don't. Tell me about that.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, some of your listeners might. So I'll tell you that during the pandemic, my boyfriend Coyote Shivers and I were hanging out at Hollywood Forever's cemetery all the time. It started with me doing it, and one day he said, "Are you doing witchcraft at the cemetery?" Because this was during 2020, and I was like, "No, why do you ask?" And he said, "Because you're there every day for hours." And I said, "Oh, well, I just feed the cats and the ducks." So
Right.
his first response was, "There's ducks there?" And then he said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I go with you?" And I was like, "Yeah." "When are you going?" "Later today. Come on, you know." So we went, and we started feeding the ducks. And then at the end of that time, he was bouncing up and down like a toddler. And he's like, "Can we do this again tomorrow?" And I said, "I do it every day." So after we started doing it all the time, because also back then, everyone will remember, like, all the parks were closed, so it was private, so it was open. So after we'd been doing that for a while, excuse me, I've got terrifying allergies, as you guys can see. Anyhow, we started training the ducks to follow us around the pond. At first he was skeptical, but he trained dogs, I trained cats. So that started working. Then, unbeknownst to me, he sampled noises from all the ducks and the Canada geese and the swans, and he erased a track of Blitzkrieg Bop by the Ramones. He erased the vocals and replaced it with all of the birds' sounds. So it's called Blitzkrieg Bop. We started training them to come up to Dee Dee Ramone's grave by playing it and dropping food all the way, and it didn't take them very long. And so at first it was only like 5 ducks, these 5 black ducks that had started following us around the cemetery, and I called them the goth ducks until I found out that it was a breed of duck called Cayuga ducks that my friend Daniel had raised from eggs, and he lived up near the cemetery. So they were his landlord told him it wasn't a barnyard, so he got permission to leave them at the cemetery. But those ducks were domesticated. Anyway, they let it. So it went from those 5 ducks every day to somewhere between 35 and often like maybe almost 100 ducks, that the minute we got there and played the music, they would all like run, swim, and fly up to Dee Dee Ramone's grave. And this was a daily thing in the pandemic. And then somebody saw it and told a friend of theirs who was a journalist. This was also, I wasn't aware of this until the Ramones Ducks Instagram profile got a DM, and it was from a girl named Brenna Ehrlich who wrote for Rolling Stone. And she said, "Do you have a few moments to answer some questions about the Ramones Ducks?" And so Coyote and I thought it was going to be like 3 or 4 lines in a gossip column. Instead, it comes out 2.5 hours later as a full feature, and it said, "Punk rock ducks run up to Dee Dee Ramone's grave every day." It went viral around the world. I can't even tell you. We were seeing things in languages that didn't even have the same alphabet, but then it would say Ramones Ducks in English. It was crazy.
That's awesome. Wow. All right. Now, for the people who don't know, Hollywood Forever is probably, I'd say, next to Forest Lawn, the main cemetery in Los Angeles.
Yes,
every
and
year,
it's also historical and gorgeous.
Right. It was the late 1800s, I think it was open.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so every year they have events there all the time. Like they have movie nights there that they project. They have Day of the Dead every October. That's the one I go to that every year. And then they have like the graves are very ornate. For example, Anton Yelchin, the actor who passed away, he was in Star Trek. He passed away, and he has a statue there. Toto from The Wizard of Oz is buried there. Mickey Rooney
is there.
Vampira is there. Douglas Fairbanks is there. And
oh my God, I used to go and get high near Douglas Fairbanks' grave, but this was in the 70s. But where there's these vents, there was vents on the sarcophagus, and I used to stick my face in it and go, because I wanted to inhale movie star DNA. I thought it would work.
Kids, don't try that. Don't do that. Don't.
Well,
don't
those vents have been filled in. That was probably my fault.
But what the reason why I bring it up is because it has such a presence. Because even like with the Day of the Dead celebration, you know, when you're going around, they have all the lights off. And it gives it like this different air that you might not get, especially in the daytime. And you can just feel the presence of the spirits around you, and it's very powerful. Have you experienced that?
Yes, I'm always there with the spirits, and I've actually been fortunate enough to be asked by different people to do cleansings, like in their families' mausoleums. And I mean, seriously, the spirits that are around Hollywood forever, you can feel it. Even in the 70s, when it was in the 70s, this is when I started going to it. It was like a punk rock after hours club in the 70s, because there weren't the same owners. It was never locked at night. There's stories about this in my books, Rock and Roll Witch, and in Showgirl Confidential, the book that came out a bit before it. Yeah. Anyhow, we would just go and wander around there at night, you know, because if you wanted to make noise, if you wanted to bring a boom box, because none of us had like phones in those days, you could do it, because who was going to complain? Like the people in the mausoleum over there or buried near you. And but I had a lot of crazy experiences in the cemetery too at night, and then I'm not going to talk about it because it's too long to explain, but it's in my books. But there was always spirits there, and you can just feel it. It oozes like through the whole air, even if you're not like psychic or you're not like sensitive to that. If you just go there and sit on, you know, quietly on a blanket on the lawn, or like on the steps, or on one of those benches. Sorry, I don't know if you guys heard that roaring thing going through, but anyhow, yeah, you can feel the presence, you know, and I feel a lot like, and there's so much life in there too, with the wildlife, and then with people that bring like their toddlers there for walks, or you know, it also has that wild Hollywood energy, that old Hollywood energy, and I've been in cemeteries all over the world, and the two most unique places I've ever been was the City of the Dead in Cairo, Egypt, and Hollywood Forever. Those have the most like spiritual like vibes and feelings of any of the places that I've been to.
Yeah, and there's definitely a magical vibe in that area. Like there's a Santa Muerte shrine nearby. Of course, you have the movie studios where all these different movies have been made over the last 100 some odd years. But yeah, it definitely has that vibe that you're describing. Definitely. Do you ever go to any of the events there, like the movie nights?
I haven't been in a long time to go to those, because again, that's like also the same reason that I haven't read books in a while. I am juggling so many projects, and also when I do events that other people are putting on, there's still a lot of like back and forth on emails, or you know, figuring out flights and all that stuff, because I'm going to be traveling almost at a pre-pandemic level this year for the first time in a while. You know, I've got lots of in and out in LA.
Nice.
Usually my whole social life takes place backstage if I'm working with you. not always, or when there's ducks involved.
Right.
Because we still do the ducks almost every day at Echo Park too. But Yes, there's so much going on at night in LA that if it's not something I'm producing, I really like try to go to it, but it's not always possible.
Nice. Well, we're coming up on an hour, so before we go, can you tell us a little bit about the projects you're working on right now?
Yes, I'm definitely working, but sporadically working on a follow-up to Rock and Roll Witch. It's going to have a slightly different title. But when I was writing Rock and Roll Witch, I wasn't even thinking of calling that the way I write is I just put story ideas into a folder on my computer, and then I just sort of go, what do I feel like writing like today? And so when every story I felt like writing about turned out to be occulty, that's how that book got titled. So I'm working on a follow-up to that. I'm doing Bell Book and Candle. I'm not sure when this podcast will air, but on September 6th, 7th, and 8th, which is next week as we're recording this, I'm leading tours at the Punk Rock Museum in Las Vegas.
Oh, nice.
So if you're in Las Vegas, I'm going to be there telling insane stories like the ones I'm telling here, but maybe more elaborate and longer because my stories are batshit. From back in the day. Then in November, back to back, I'm going to be in Wichita, Kansas. Let's say Wichita, because the women that are sponsoring me, that's how they spell it. They spell Wichita like W-I-T-C-H, like proper witchcraft.
Right.
So that's for a dance event. And then I'm going to be at another event the following week in Portland called Umbre Noctis Festival. So you can tell that that's also like a super dark occulty burlesque festival.
And that's important.
I got to say, though, yeah, that's Portland. Bell Book and Candle. It's the first ever occult burlesque show.
Well, actually,
but I'm so happy it's becoming a thing.
That's a good question. That's a good. Okay, so how has the occult influenced Bell Book and Candle? Like, does it change the vibe? Does it change the feel of the performance when it has a magical connotation?
Oh yes, and we have a ritual at every show in the middle of the second act. It's obviously a live interactive ritual. A lot of times there's like things that the audience needs to do during the ritual. Mm-hmm. My co-producer Intuitive Shauna will make tools for the audience to use during the ritual, and sometimes it can be something like blowing bubbles, or other times it's some kind of thing that they have to like write an intention down and tear it up. We get everybody in the whole place chanting. My friend Lisa Derrick told me that Bell Book and Candle is the largest monthly coven in LA. And I have to tell you that there's been a few sites that have the names are slipping me. I think one of them might have been Haunted Los Angeles. I might be wrong. That have mentioned all the paranormal activity at El Cid, because even though this sounds like a gimmick, we really are an all witch show run by and for witches that's in a haunted venue. So anyway, some of the paranormal sites are saying it's believed that the spirits at El Cid are more active because the amount of on-stage rituals performed. And I'm here to tell you, nobody before Bell Book and Candle did an on-stage ritual unless it was happening in the silent movie days.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah.
Wait, I'll tell you something else funny. This is hilarious. This was in the early days of Bell Book and Candle. I didn't hear this, but an audience member heard it and reported it back to me. This was probably in our second year. And she said, a waiter came with a tray full of glasses that had to be bussed, and he goes, I've worked the past 5 days straight, and now those bitches are fucking summoning Satan in there. which wasn't true, but that was his take.
You're never going to convince him otherwise. I'm sorry. That's just what they. That's just what
Wait, I'll tell you what we saw. This was a couple of shows ago. My stage manager, Morgan, my MC, May West, and I were backstage while a performer named Blue Lightning was on stage dancing to really, really loud metal. And I'm saying this because all of a sudden, all of us heard like a glass breaking, like above the metal music, which was nuts. And none of us had a glass in our hand. And the cups that they give you at El Cid aren't glass if you're taking something backstage, right? And so there, like, May reached down and picked up this big giant shard of glass, and we all were like, "What the fuck?" And then I was like standing looking at this alcove. We're like right off the stage, and there's a little alcove there, and this mirror that has been on the wall the entire time that we've been there. Just I saw it lift up off the wall and then slam down onto the floor, and they all heard that too and saw it. And I mean. Yeah.
Wow. Careful with those.
That place is haunted as fuck.
Wow. All right. Well, Pleasant, this has been an amazing time for me. I can't thank you enough for joining me today. As I said before, you're a legend, you're an icon, and you make this city what it is, and I really appreciate you coming on.